Awesome. We'll take us now through a little bit of category specific trends rather than the high level that we were originally talking.
Yeah, and that's good timing since I just led into this. So we can go ahead, Jared. So we're going to start off with electronics, which I think is a great one to start on because it's definitely one of the categories that would be affected most by seasonality going from Q4 to Q1. If you think about the ASP of electronics, they're pretty high. A lot of people will give electronics as gifts, or they're very cautious about purchasing electronics because you want to think about it, you want to browse. These are products that you don't just buy on a whim. So when you're looking quarter over quarter, as you would expect, essentially all of our major KPIs went down. CPCs decreased, but so did ROAS, so did average daily spend, and so did conversion rate. I really think that's primarily just seasonality. You don't see a lot of electronics really pick up in Q1 because most people kind of spent all their money in Q4 for the holidays and now are just being kind of cautious and reserved about what they buy. So this isn't really out of the ordinary. It's what you'd essentially expect to see.
I think, electronics as a category, I'm pretty excited about the new capabilities we have with AMC and kind of uncovering. I mean, we all know it's super long purchase time. Everybody's researching things months in advance in many instances. And that all makes sense. We've never really had any data behind it to tell us what that actually means. And I think AMC integration with search and DSP and understanding consideration link will be a pretty interesting one for us to start into and understand that even though there's these lulls in the year, almost seasonal, right, for electronics, maybe they're equally as important from a consideration perspective. And I think we really haven't had the data available to us to start to really dive into that until now. And so I think I'm excited to see what we can uncover with some of our electronic partners that we work with really closely and some of the data that AMC's kind of uncovered for them in the last 3-4 months that we've really got into that work.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And I think another thing to note is, obviously ROAS went down, spend went down, and conversion rate fell, but CPCs also went down. So like you said, if this isn't the point in the year where you can start a customer journey, maybe that purchase doesn't happen until Q2, Q3, but at least you're getting people in your kind of purchasing cycle so that then you can have a more kind of effective targeting strategy for those users. And you got them there cheaper than you would in Q2, Q3, Q4. Year over year, some really interesting things happen with the electronics category as well, which I think is less obviously about seasonality. We're comparing the same period to the period last year, but I think a lot of it has to do with some of those economic considerations we were talking about. People are being a little bit more cautious with their dollars. They're not spending as much as people were in the prior year. A lot of that has to do with inflation along with other economic concerns. So you're seeing advertisers spend a bit more. Essentially flat, but about a percentage more from a daily perspective year over year. And CPCs are going down. So essentially that means there's probably more traffic to be had. You're seeing just around 4% reductions year over year, but you're seeing ROAS go down and you're also seeing conversion rate go down pretty significantly. And I think that speaks to the fact that people are browsing more often. You're seeing more clicks. You're seeing more people spend into those clicks. But again, they're being cautious about purchasing. So there's going to be a longer browsing period, and they're not just going to immediately purchase these really high cost products. So I think that's what we're seeing here. I think we'll probably continue to see that throughout the year in a lesser degree. I think the end of Q1 was totally different than the beginning of Q1, January versus March. You saw buying behavior pick up a little bit in March. But for electronics specifically, I'd expect to see, the tailwind of this throughout the remainder of 2023. Great. So now flipping over to grocery, which is a completely different category, right? Because like I said earlier, you have to eat. So grocery saw some really interesting quarter over quarter trends. CPCs did fall, which is what you'd expect going from Q4 to Q1. ROAS did increase, again, something you'd expect across most categories quarter over quarter. But people did actually spend a little bit more quarter over quarter. Not a huge amount, about 1-2%, but that's still notable given the fact that Q4 is a hosting season. People are typically, buying more groceries. They have more people to feed. And you did see conversion rate go up quarter over quarter as well. So I think some of this obviously speaks to seasonality, but I think also some of it is going to be more retailer specific. Again, I talked about those grocery forward retailers like Instacart and Walmart. You're seeing a lot of growth there. And so I think with that, the grocery category will just kind of grow naturally. Alex, I see you nodding your head. Do you have something to add to that?
No, I agree. And I think, some of the most exciting innovation, frankly, from a capability and technology perspective is happening in some of these grocery forward platforms, which leads us, to have the ability to drive better results, especially in categories like grocery and food. And some of the other ones we'll talk that are so heavily penetrated in these like omni-channel environments versus, traditional e-commerce only type platforms.
Definitely. And year over year, you're seeing some big changes with the grocery category, which again, I think tie into some of those grocery forward retailers. For instance, looking at the average daily spend, it went up over 100%. That's a huge amount. I think that's because more people are spending into platforms like Instacart than they were in previous years, right? And so that is primarily grocery and grocery adjacent categories. You're seeing CPCs go down as well. And I think because people are diversifying across a broad range of retail media as opposed to kind of focusing in those more costly areas. ROAS did go down slightly, but I'd like to put this in perspective, right? If you're spending 100% more and you see less than 2% decline in efficiency, I would say that's a win. So this is essentially flat. The one area that is a little different and notable is the conversion rate drop. So that's over 6%. But again, if you're diversifying your strategy, you're growing across all of these platforms and you're spending more, getting more traffic, not all of that is going to be relevant, but a lot of it will be. So you kind of have to throw out a wider net and you'll catch some good fish and some you'll have to throw back, right? Horrible metaphor, apologies for that. So overall, I think that we're seeing a lot of change with the grocery category, both quarter over quarter, but more importantly, year over year, because of that diversification of retailers that people are advertising on and just kind of the growth across all of retail media as opposed to being siloed in one place. Alex, anything to add there?
No.
Great. You don't want to add a horrible metaphor too?
I'm going to let yours stand.
Oh, great. Beauty and personal care is one of those really interesting categories. I call it grocery adjacent, right? It's an area that you kind of do have to spend into. But looking from Q4 to Q1 is always interesting in this category because you get a lot of those people who start the new year. It's a new year, it's a new me, and they want to buy new products, whether it's cosmetics or hygiene products, personal care type products. So you do tend to see an opportunity from an incremental perspective during Q1. And some people within this category have their peak season during Q1 as opposed to Q4. That being said, when looking at the category as a whole, you actually saw CPCs decrease the most here, about 16%, almost 17% quarter over quarter. So that's pretty significant. And as you would expect, efficiency improved with the CPC reduction of that magnitude, almost 13% quarter over quarter. Ad spend did fall, which I think is very interesting given the fact that, again, a lot of people within beauty and personal care consider Q1 their peak season. It went down just over 7%. And conversion rate went up, which again is aligned with that kind of consumer behavior that we discussed earlier. I think there's kind of a mix of things causing these quarter over quarter changes. One is consumer behavior. You're seeing conversion rate go up. You're seeing ROAS go up. People are buying these products more often in Q1. Also, I think the CPC reduction and the ad spend reduction speaks more so to the economic considerations that we were discussing before, and also the fact that there were some inventory constraints on some of the bigger retailers, specifically Amazon in Q4, that meant a lot of these brands didn't meet the numbers that they expected to in 2022, and so they had less budget for 2023. So seeing that kind of reduction quarter over quarter, you'll see the same thing year over year, just a little bit of a shift from an economic perspective. But you're still seeing people buying more often in Q1 within this category, and I think, again, that speaks to that new year, new me mentality. A lot of brands within these categories will run promotions during Q1, so there's a lot of ways to kind of drum up that activity. And looking year over year, we're seeing an increase in daily average ad spend, so up about 51%. Obviously, that's lower than grocery, but it's still pretty notable. CPCs went down year over year as well. That's a huge number, almost 18% reduction. Just like we saw quarter over quarter, this category in general is growing. and with it, it's becoming more efficient. ROAS stayed about flat, which I think if you're, again, increasing your spend that much and seeing relatively the same ROAS, that's a great trend. But you did see a little bit of a drop in conversion rate. Even though people are more likely to buy within this category during Q1, and also it's one of those categories where it's like, if you need toothpaste, you have to buy toothpaste, right? There are some products that aren't as adjacent to that kind of grocery category. And if you don't need to buy it during kind of an inflationary period, you're not going to. So I think that's part of the reason we're seeing conversion rate go down. But definitely kind of a mix of factors contributing to these trends.
Yeah, I think the piece I would add on beauty and personal care, I have the privilege to see a lot of our partners and how they're activating and what they're doing. And beauty and personal care has been one of the categories I think I've seen the highest proliferation of trying new things, different ad types, really trying to uncover how you can leverage more than just the traditional in-grid placements, especially as all these new capabilities at Instacart and Walmart, et cetera, have came out. And so I think there's a little bit of natural like testing and learning placements and modifiers that we're able to add some of like the conversion, get great tailwind from a CPC perspective, offset by a really tough CVR trend. And I think as we focus on getting CVR back up accordingly and hopefully holding-ish CPCs, that ROIs growth will return. But I think some of this has been driven by these manufacturers and brands have been willing to kind of test and learn and try out all the new innovation that's come out from many retailers, and some of it doesn't work well for them. Some of it does, but that's why we ultimately do test and learn to find out.
Great. And pet supplies is another one of those areas that is somewhat unique. You have to feed your pet just like you have to feed yourself, so it's going to have less of that kind of economic impact. But you do see that often in Q1, pet supplies will grow, and that's because a lot of people get new puppies, new cats, goldfish over the holiday season for their kids or their family, and so you have a new pet, and there's an incremental opportunity. So quarter over quarter, you actually saw pet supplies increase from a CPC perspective, almost 10%, which is pretty notable. But again, in line with what we've seen in previous years. ROAS decreased slightly, about 5%, but when you're seeing more competition, you typically expect to see a little bit of a hit to efficiency, which will level out throughout the year. Ad spend increased almost 25%. This, I think, has to do with the seasonality, right, that we were talking about before, but also I mentioned some inventory issues. I know for a fact that pet supplies was one of the categories that was hit pretty hard by this on Amazon, so a lot of advertisers had leftover ad spend from Q4, which is very rare that they could push into Q1. So I think that's part of the reason we're seeing one of the largest increases from a quarter over quarter perspective within this category. Conversion rate fell just slightly, just under 4%. Looking quarter over quarter, again, if you spend a little bit more, you're casting a wider net, you're most likely going to see a little bit of a reduction in conversion rate. If it was larger than this, I'd say that there were other indicators of why this was happening, but I think mostly just because people were spending significantly more, trying to kind of make up for the downturn that they saw during Q4 and the inventory issues they were having overall.
It's also like pets is so penetrated online as well, right? It's like a lot of categories who aren't as penetrated have a little bit of a natural tailwind all the time of like capturing conversions that are brand new to shopping that type of category or that product online in many areas. And pet has been one with baby care, some like, healthcare products that, have led the industry from a penetration standpoint for a long time. Pre-COVID, that was extremely developed online. And so I think you just have an ultra competitive category that doesn't have some of the natural tailwinds from an omni and e-com perspective as some other ones do. And so I think it's one that's a bit more challenging to find success on. And you've got to be really sharp and really good. You've got to have a capability that allows you to do so. So it's an interesting category, similar to, like I said, baby care and electronics that have been so penetrated and developed for some time.
Yes, highly competitive. It is the area where we saw the largest CPC increases to quarter over quarter. I think people are starting to be really granular with their strategies in pet food. You know, a lot of pet owners are diversifying how they purchase the food for their pet. It's not just all kibble anymore. You have raw kibble, you have wet food, you have fresh food. So people are trying to be a little bit more specific there. But you also have kind of that interesting dynamic of having Chewy in the mix along with these other big retailers. So you have kind of pet specific sites, and then you have Amazon, and then you have, you know, the grocery sites, all of which could specialize in pet. But there are some really interesting nuances from a holistic perspective because of all of those different options people have. And year over year, we're seeing some similar trends that we saw with some of the kind of other grocery adjacent categories. Huge increase in daily average spend, about 67, almost 68%. CPC has actually remained relatively flat year over year, which I think is a good sign given the fact that you're spending so much more. ROAS did go up, and I think that speaks to the fact that CPCs are going down and people are finding ways to be more efficient, even when conversion rate is going down, because conversion rate did drop almost 10% year over year. So a lot of really interesting trends that are kind of different from some of the other categories, but seeing that efficiency go up, even though conversion rate went down, I think is just speaking to how people are becoming, you know, we were touching on this earlier, but a little bit more mature in their strategies. In a category that's super competitive, you have to try out new retailers, new strategies, new channels, ad types. And so this is just kind of, I think, a key example of that. Even with less purchasing, or at least on average, fewer people purchasing, you can still find more efficiency and more sales just by diversifying your ad strategy across all of your retailers.
Yeah, I think the nuance this trend kind of uncovers of, if I just blanket told you that CPCs were essentially flat and CVR was down almost double digits, you would guess 99 out of 100 times that your return was significantly less. And in reality, we were able to offset that via intentionality and mix. And I think that what that really helps us understand is the industry is very, very anti-ROAS right now, rightfully, and we'll have a whole nother webinar to talk about that. Everyone still focuses predominantly on ROAS or return or restated ROAS, whatever it may be. And I think, you know, what's important to understand that is ROAS itself isn't an actual metric. It's an output of 4 underlying metrics. You have cost, and you have conversion. Cost you can decouple into clicks times CPCs, and conversion you can decouple into conversion rate and basket value. And it's easy to kind of lose sight in the power of conversion and basket value and what that actually means to a return. In many instances, if you can figure out how to drive significantly better basket or increase your conversion rate a couple points, you typically can actually spend, from a CPC perspective, 10, 20, 30% more and still hold relative return. And so I like that this kind of uncovers that a little bit of really, really hard headwind to battle from a conversion rate perspective, but we were able to offset that with some intentionality and mix and what we were able to influence consumers to buy and still drive them the return that the brand, you know, was really looking for.
Yeah, definitely. I know from personal experience, you know, a lot of the brands that we work with within this category, there's conversations about what bag size do we sell? What's an introductory product? Do we do bundles? And that's, you know, across all of the retailers. How can we look at things more cohesively across our retailers? If we get someone to purchase here and then they move to this retailer, how do we get them to continue to purchase there? So I think that kind of ties into what you're discussing, just being really creative with your mix, your strategy. Ultimately, you can still see good results even in a less than ideal kind of seasonality period.